Hello and welcome to episode number 26 of the For All That podcast. Joining Michael and I this week is Peter McColl, who is Rector of Edinburgh University and a Green Party supporter. Hello Peter, thank you for coming on.
Hello, good to be here.
And as ever, it's myself, Andrew Tickell, and himself, Michael Greenwell. How are you, Michael?
Not too bad. Coming live from Studio 2, which is the in-laws' house. So.
Oh, there we are. We're a very high-tech folk here on this podcast. So we can just maybe crack straight on with one of the big stories of this week, which was one that caught your eye, Peter, which was what was going on in the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, and particularly in relationship to homosexualist celebrants, as some of the aged and members of them might describe them. Do you want to have a wee talk to us about that?
Well, I bumped into somebody on the train last night who's a minister in the Church of Scotland, and he told me that the last time they discussed this, one of his fellow commissioners asked for the person in charge of the Theological Commission to define terms of the Sex Act.
Oh, so what a romantic sensibility one would have. That's a lawyer's question, isn't it?
Which I thought was a wonderful piece of background to that individual's understanding of the problems concerned here. So the Church of Scotland, I have an interest in this because I was brought up an Irish Presbyterian, and for me the idea that the Presbyterian Church in Ireland would discuss having gay clergy is absolutely out with the realms of possibility. And in fact, the moderator of the Presbyterian Church in Ireland made a speech to exactly that effect, saying, please don't make any progress on this because it'll drive our churches apart. You are being divisive, which is, I always think, a wonderfully ironic statement to make. But the Church of Scotland appears to have made some progress, probably mostly at the rhetorical level, by the recognition of gay clergy. I was really pleased to see a debate that was sober and sensible and not emotive, and certainly didn't delve into the Norman Tebbit areas of debate, where I think this week, what was it he said? He said that we couldn't have gay marriage because a future queen could marry a lesbian lover.
Oh, no, nothing. So it was much more degenerate than that. It was a lesbian queen that was forced to be inseminated by an unknown, unregal seminal duct artificially.
This makes them sound like cows or something.
As if it had ever been the case that we didn't know who the parent of a very senior royal was.
You might very well think that. I suppose then the parallels with breeding stock are probably quite appropriate, in the sense I dare say that lesbian tendencies among female royals would not be something which would be actively encouraged by the regal establishment.
I suspect not.
Yeah, at least only recreationally, one would say. But
anyway, the Church of Scotland had a sensible debate about this and appear to have moved towards a position where they're going to recognise gay clergy, although it's much more complex than that, and all very much more problematic than I think it was represented in the media. But even still, it was an interesting debate, and one that I thought had that throwback to a time before I really remember, when the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland tried to speak as a Scottish Parliament while there wasn't a Scottish Parliament, but there was a real demand for a Scottish Parliament. And you had things like the Sermon on the Mount from Margaret Thatcher and playing a real role in national debate. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and I think it was something which I thought as well. I mean, they have some rather old-fashioned coverage of the General Assembly on the BBC with, is it Sheena MacDonald, hosting it sort of from out of the dark ages, and it does make you think that sort of, although the quality of debate was actually quite interesting, and I'm not a sympathiser and wasn't really raised in the Church of Scotland. I was raised near the Church of Scotland, but not in it, as it were. But I thought it was quite sort of intelligent and actually often more intelligent, dare I say, than our parliamentary assemblies, which always makes one slightly slightly sad that the God, God's call tends to pick out smarter people, and the call of the people hitherto. But I think you're right, Peter. But it was interesting this week, and I wanted to go back to the Northern Irish point you made. I don't know if you saw it, but BBC Question Time discussed this week about the gay marriage issue, because it's been discussed again in Westminster, and throwing up all the more contentious statements and rather eccentric remarks by backbench MPs, from the Conservative backbench MPs primarily, I should say. But also the point was made that Northern Ireland sort of stands out, and an audience member made an interesting point to the Paisley Jr. He said something to the effect of, "You're all terribly keen on your British identity until sort of the rest of Britain takes an attitude, a more liberalising attitude towards a particular social issue such as same-sex marriage, and then suddenly you're retreating behind the bunkers of Ulster and thinking, no, we're just going to carry on opposing these measures." I wonder, what do you think about that?
Well, it's one of those things I was always very interested in. For all that both Ulster Unionists and their rather more aggressive successors in the Democratic Unionist Party, Paisley's party, claim to want to be part of the British state, I never got the impression that they very much liked Britain. They liked an idea of Britain, but they didn't really like Britain itself. Because it was full of degenerates and homosexuals and people who drank alcohol and all of those sorts of things. And in fact, what they really wanted was some kind of Cromwellian state, perhaps. I don't know. Certainly not something that you would ever find in Britain. Although I often wonder with UKIP's success whether the rest of Britain is following Northern Ireland down the DUP route.
Mm. Yes, and there was something you pointed out just before we started, which was interesting to me, that you were saying that Holyrood has set back the timetable again on its same-sex marriage bill, and I know that for myself and others, this has been quite a confusing sort of delay, not least for venal strategic reasons, that if there is a significant segment of the Scottish population which is disgruntled and dissatisfied and very much moved by this issue, then why put it cheek by jowl with the independence referendum? Why not get out of the way as soon as possible, even if you believe in it, even if you believe that that equality and equalisation of marriage and hopefully equalisation of civil partnerships is something worth going for? Why would you leave yourself vulnerable to people who might, think in the ballot boxes in autumn of 2014? Like, no, these are the people who introduced this disagreeable legislation.
What are the official reasons for the delay, or have they given any?
Peter?
Well, that's a good question. I couldn't find out what they were. It just seemed to be a statement that it's been delayed.
What do you think about the strategic sort of question I was talking about in that context?
Well, I mean, I quite agree. I think the only thing worse than them delaying it is them getting it wrong. So if there are serious issues that they need to resolve, and obviously we don't know what those issues would be, and it's hard to tell from what the debate's been so far what those issues would be, then it's better that they've delayed this yet again. But it does seem to be an ongoing pattern. I mean, I was at an event yesterday where John Finney, the former SNP MSP who left over NATO, was saying he couldn't understand why it was the SNP government were refusing to extend freedom of information to the royal family. It seems in some of these areas like they're not being as forthright as really they should be.
Because that was at a radical independence something, wasn't it, Peter?
Yes, yeah, it was in Aberdeen.
Up in Aberdeen. And are they radical in Aberdeen?
Oh, possibly less radical than elsewhere. But, well, I mean, they were less radical on a sunny Saturday afternoon than the people of Edinburgh were on a chilly Thursday evening.
So basically, every evening in Edinburgh, more or less.
Well, indeed.
Okay, well, I think that's. What do you think about that, Michael? I would bring you in at that point there on, because the sort of same-sex marriage thing was a point made by Ewan McColl this week in the Scotland on Sunday, that it's something which some people care about quite a lot, and people in the Parliament maybe get quite invested in, but he has his doubts, as it were, about whether the average punter in the pub finds it an absolutely salient issue which is going to move their vote one way or the other. I wonder, does that resonate with you at all?
I think it's one of these things. I think one of our previous guests said, a lot of people, if you ask them about it, would say, haven't we done that already? it seems extraordinary that it's taking so long, particularly when it's been done in so many other countries. It's not like this would be the first place ever to do this. It's happening all around the world. So just the delay seems very strange to me, as you pointed out.
Mm. And it's sort of, from the SNP point of view, from the politics, as I see it, it sends out all of the wrong messages. There may be legal problems, that's important, like Peter was saying. There may be technical problems, and you don't want to get it wrong. You don't want to get this legislation ending up in court and knocked flat, because you don't want to have to revisit it again. That seems just reasonable. But the sort of, the progressive beacon, which has been talked up by various SNP politicians, might have been better stoked if the beacon had sort of started casting its illumination rather more briskly than in Westminster. I don't think that Holyrood's parliamentary procedures can be any more substantial or long term. They can't be. They have to be less, because there's only one chamber, not two. So I don't really see that it's good politics either for the independence referendum or for sort of trying to cultivate this positive image of a sort of progressive Scotland leading the way for them to be dawdling, whatever the legal difficulties. That would be my interpretation anyway. This week I wrote a blog post about something which I've noticed, which is that Ireland seems to be missing from the independence debate. A smallish nation on our borders with a land border with Britain, speaking English, it seems to me in many ways quite an obvious comparator for why a state can have convivial relations with Britain eventually, and in the context not of course of a civil war breakup and all of that kind of calamity which engulfed Ireland, but we can have a positive relationship that we're not talking about foreigners, we're talking about people who are citizens of a different state but are quite close to Britain, and it's all very conceivable to me that Ireland is a good example for people in a way which maybe Scandinavia is a bit abstract. And I got some interesting responses to that piece, mostly arguing that Ireland wasn't mentioned because it's a basket case economically, and it raises the sort of Alex Salmond's anxieties about the westward edge of his now abandoned arc of prosperity, or secondly that it raises a sort of spectre of sectarian tension and division, and that's probably something which people who support Scottish independence should avoid. Peter, what do you think about that?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. I remember 1998 when 1997, 1998, when there was the talk of the referendum and the talk of the Parliament and that sort of thing. And a lot of the people I knew in Northern Ireland at that time were very bleak in their predictions about what would happen in Scotland, and believing that inevitably, with what they would sometimes call home rule, was inevitably coming a new wave of sectarianism, and you were going to get a throwback to the Protestant party in Edinburgh and sectarianism in Glasgow. And I think it's pretty clear that there's the possibility that could happen. It turns out that while I don't think that we should be relaxed about it, while I think we have to be wary of sectarianism coming, I don't really think that's happened. And I think people like David Trimble, the former First Minister of Northern Ireland, have made a lot of dark predictions about sectarianism as a result of devolution or independence. I don't think that's very likely to happen. I think it's an epiphenomenon of football. It's not really something that we have to worry about. What I do think is interesting about what Andrew was saying about Ireland as a possible way of understanding what a social union looks like, or what it looks like to have neighbourly relations with another country that shares significant parts of the history, significant parts of the culture. It is that it's a very interesting prospect, but the reason why nobody in the pro-independence side is going to talk about that is that Ireland is an economic basket case at the moment. It's a disaster. That's a very bad message for the independence campaign.
Isn't it an interesting point that part of that economic disaster came from following, in some senses, the model of the British state economically?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'd absolutely agree with you. I don't think that because Ireland made a mess of it, Scotland will make a mess of it. I don't think those things read across particularly well. But I think